This story begins in a field hospital in 1987, in the final years of the Iran-Iraq War, where a young Iranian female doctor and a French doctor of Algerian origin first met over the same operating table. It did not end there. It continued for 30 years, through different crises, through different patients, and ultimately led to a question that both carried with them throughout their medical lives. When everything is divided by nationality, religion, and politics, why is the human body so similar? Blood flows in the same color, hearts beat in the same rhythm, and pain, no matter where you come from, needs to be heard in the same language. Chapter 1. Others. Girl who wanted to become a doctor, Tehran, 1979. When a child decides what she wants to do for the rest of her life, Leila Ahmadi remembers exactly the moment she decided to become a doctor. She was 11 years old, standing in the hallway of a nearby hospital, clutching her mother's sleeve, looking through a slightly open door into a room. Inside, a middle-aged man lay on a bed, pale, breathing with difficulty, and a woman in a white coat sat beside him, doing nothing extraordinary, only holding his hand and speaking softly. The man closed his eyes. His face relaxed. Leila did not understand what the woman had said, but she understood that the act of one hand holding another had done something no medicine could do. It told the person in pain that he was not alone. She tugged at her mother's sleeve and said, "I want to do that." Her mother, Zara, a literature teacher at a high school, looked down at her daughter and smiled. Not the smile of someone who doubted, but the smile of someone who knew that from this day forward, her child's life had a clear direction. Leila. My mother did not ask me, "Are you sure?" She simply nodded as if it were obvious. Later I asked her why, and she said, "Because your eyes lit up when you looked into that room. I had never seen your eyes shine like that before." That was the simplest and most sufficient reason I have ever heard for choosing a profession. Leila grew up in an intellectual family in Tehran, her father a civil engineer, her mother a teacher. 2 older sisters already in university. Their home was always filled with books, with evening discussions ranging from poetry to philosophy, and with the belief that human beings, regardless of gender, were born to use their minds. In 1979, the revolution changed Iran. Leila was 11, not old enough to fully understand politics, but old enough to sense the change in the air. Her parents spoke more quietly, more anxiously. Familiar friends began to leave the country. She asked her mother, and Zara answered, "The country is changing. People will disagree about many things. But do you know what will not change? People who are sick will still need to be treated, no matter what is happening outside." That sentence stayed with Leila and never faded 15 years later. Standing in a field hospital in the war zone of Khuzestan, Leila would think back to those words and realize they were the most precise guidance her mother could have given. Chapter 2. Medical School and the Lessons Not Found in Textbooks. Tehran, 1983 to 1987. Learning to save lives. In wartime, Leila entered Tehran University Medical School in 1983, when the war with Iraq had entered its 3rd year. A wartime medical school is not like one in peacetime. The lecture halls were still there, the professors still there, but the atmosphere had changed. Many students came to class with red eyes after hearing news from the front. Some professors carried the psychological scars of sleepless emergency shifts. And in the practice rooms, the clinical cases increasingly included injuries the textbooks had not prepared them for: wounds from shrapnel, from blast waves, from chemical weapons. Leila excelled not because she was a genius, but because she never treated this as theory. Every case in a book was a real person somewhere. Every treatment decision would affect a life. Leila, I had a classmate named Shirin, much better than me in grades. But the first time we encountered real patients in the hospital, her hands shook. I asked why. She said, "Because now I realize this is a real person, I did not shake. Not because I did not understand, but because I had been thinking about this since I was 11. I had already done my shaking long ago. In her 4th year, a professor named Dr. Karimi, who had worked with international medical organizations in humanitarian crises, gave a lecture on medicine in conflict. He brought photographs, not shocking battlefield images, but pictures of field hospitals, of doctors working in harsh conditions, of patients saved from places that seemed beyond saving. After the lecture, Leila stayed behind and asked him a question. When doctors go into war zones and treat everyone including the other side, are they not seen as traitors? Dr. Karimi looked at her for a moment before answering. That question shows you are thinking in the right direction. The answer is, it depends on who is asking. To some people, it is treason. To a doctor, it is duty. And to the patient who is saved regardless of who they are or where they come from, it is the only thing that matters. You will have to decide where you stand. Leila went home and sat with that question for a long time. Even as she went to sleep, she did not have a complete answer. But she knew one thing: she would not refuse to treat anyone because they had a different name or spoke a different language. That was the line she drew for herself, and she would not cross it. In 1987, Leila graduated as a general practitioner with excellent results. She could have stayed in Tehran, worked in a major hospital, in a relatively safe environment. Instead, she volunteered for the Iranian Red Crescent medical team, requesting assignment to the southwestern rear line near Khuzestan, where wounded soldiers and civilians needed care. Her mother cried. Her father stayed silent for a long time before embracing her. Leila left with a small suitcase and a notebook filled with notes from 4 years of study. Chapter 3. The Field. Hospital Khuzestan, 1987. A place without time to distinguish. The field hospital in Avaz was unlike anything Leila had seen in textbooks or training hospitals in Tehran. It was an old building repurposed 3 floors, stained walls, some windows covered with sandbags. A large red cross was painted on the roof, visible from afar. The smell was a mixture of antiseptic, blood, sweat, and smoke, a scent Leila would later say she could never forget on her first day. The head of the medical team, Dr. Hosseini, a 50-year-old man whose eyes always looked as though he had not slept, met her for 5 minutes and said, "There is no fixed schedule here. No real shifts. When there are patients, you work. When there are none, you sleep as much as you can because you never know when you will be needed again. Ask questions. Observe. And do not be afraid to admit what you do not know." Patients here do not have time for a doctor's ego. Leila nodded and began working that very afternoon. The first weeks were a faster education than 4 years of medical school. She learned to stabilize patients with limited equipment, learned triage, deciding who to treat first when resources were scarce, learned to speak truthfully to families without cruelty, and learned that after a long surgery that still ended in loss, you wash your hands, breathe, and move to the next bed. Leila, the hardest part was not the medical skills. The hardest part was learning how to feel just enough. Too little and you lose empathy. Too much and you cannot function. It took me my entire first year to find that balance, and I am still not sure I ever did. That was where she met Youssef Ben Ali. Youssef was a French doctor of Algerian origin, 34 years old, in Iran through an international medical collaboration with Doctors Without Borders. He spoke English and Arabic, and some Farsi learned in a few weeks before arriving. He had a dark complexion, a tall frame, and always wore an old stethoscope around his neck even when not, examining patients as if removing it would take away part of him. They first met over the same operating table during an emergency surgery on a severely wounded patient. No introductions. No handshake, only 2 strangers forced to cooperate immediately to save a life Leila assisted. Youssef led. The operating room was filled only with the sounds of instruments, machines, and short commands. The language of surgery was English, a neutral medical language. After 2 hours, the operation was successful. Youssef removed his gloves, looked at Leila and said in English, "Good work." "You have calm hands," Leila replied. "You too. Though I noticed you hesitated at the third suture." Youssef paused, then smiled the smile of someone caught but not offended. "You noticed that. Most people do not. I notice everything." It is a habit that was their first conversation short, professional, without emotion. But both knew by instinct, common among those in the same profession, that the other was someone they could trust in an operating room and in their circumstances. That was the foundation of everything. Chapter 4. The Patient Without a Name. Khuzestan, 1987. When the other side lies on your bed 3 weeks after arriving in Ahvaz. Leila faced what Dr. Hosseini had implied, but not said directly. One early morning, a man was brought in unconscious, severely wounded in the chest and right leg. He wore no uniform, just partially burned civilian clothes. No identification. Leila immediately began emergency care ventilation, checking pulse, dressing wounds. 10 minutes later, a local man stood at the door and said in Farsi, "Doctor, he speaks Arabic. He is not one of us." Leila did not stop working. She replied, "He is bleeding. That is all I need to know right now." The man at the door was silent for a moment, then left. Youssef stood nearby, observing everything. He said nothing, only stepped forward to assist the man later known as Tariq. An Iraqi, possibly a soldier or a civilian caught in the fighting. No one knew for certain, stayed in the hospital for 5 days. Leila cared for him daily. No one came for him. No one explained who he was. On the 3rd day, he woke up. He looked at the ceiling, then at Leila changing his bandages. His eyes dark brown, lined by years of looking into the sun, held an emotion she could not immediately translate, not fear, not quite gratitude, but something close to astonishment. He spoke in Arabic Leila did not understand. She called Youssef. Youssef listened, then translated. "He says, I do not understand why you are treating me." Leila looked at the man, waiting for an answer. She replied in English for Youssef to translate, "Because it is my job." "And because you are human." Tariq listened, closed his eyes, and a tear rolled down his temple. She did not ask what kind of tear it was. Some things do not need language. He left on the 6th day, when stable enough to walk. No one knew where he went, but before leaving, he said something to Youssef. He said if he ever had a daughter, he would tell her about an Iranian doctor who treated him so she would know not all Iranians are enemies. Leila stood in the hallway for a moment after he left, then turned back to work. The war did not pause for anyone to process anything. Chapter 5. Youssef and the question of choosing medicine in a world moving in the opposite direction. Leila and Youssef worked together for 6 months in Ahvaz. 6 months is not long in an ordinary life, but in a wartime field hospital, it felt like years because each day was dense, leaving no space to forget. Youssef was born in Marseille to an Algerian father and a French mother, growing up between 2 cultures. Never fully belonging to either, he became accustomed to standing in between. He studied medicine in Paris, worked in Nigeria, Sudan, and Lebanon before Iran. At 34, he appeared older, not from wrinkles, but from the eyes of someone who had seen too much and continued to look. People ask why I choose places like this instead of Paris or London, where conditions are better, salaries higher, life easier. The answer is simple in Paris. If I do not go, there are many other doctors. Here, if I do not go, someone will die without anyone to treat them. I cannot live with that during long night shifts, between emergencies. They talked not casually, but deeply about medicine, ethics, war, and their shared question. One night, Youssef asked, "Do you ever regret coming here?" Leila thought carefully. No. But there are days I wonder what difference we are really making. We save one person while another dies. We repair bodies but cannot heal the cause of their injuries. Sometimes it feels like pouring water into a bottomless container. Youssef nodded. I know that feeling. It took me years to accept this. Our job is not to end war. That is not a doctor's role. Our job is to ensure that in this mad world, there is still a small space where people are treated as human beings. Just that. But that is not small at all. Leila looked at him and nodded, not because she fully agreed, but because it touched something she had been searching for. Chapter 6. The Child Without a Name. Winter, 1987. The case they never forgot. In December 1987, a child about 7 years old was brought in. No adult, no documents. Found unconscious by the roadside. Severely burned on the right arm and shoulder. Face marked with soot, likely from a house fire caused by shelling. Leila took the case. Youssef assisted. They worked in silence. The child did not wake during treatment, small, fragile. With charred hair and burned hands, Leila worked steadily, but inside she realized this was her first pediatric patient. And no textbook prepares you for seeing a child without knowing their name, their origin, or whether anyone is searching for them. The child survived 3 days later. The child woke up. Brown eyes opened. Looked at the ceiling. Then at Leila, the child asked in Arabic, "Where is my mother?" There was no answer. Leila took the child's uninjured hand and held it gently, not answering, but not leaving the hand alone. They called the child Kuchulu, meaning little one, after 3 weeks. A woman came, a neighbor from Iraq, who had survived and was searching for survivors. She recognized the child. She said she would take care of the child. Leila watched them leave. There were no guarantees. But sometimes, a hand reaching out was enough. Chapter 7. After the war, Tehran, 1988 to 2004. Peace and invisible wounds. The war ended in August 1988. Leila returned to Tehran. Youssef to Paris. They exchanged addresses and wrote letters regularly at first. Then less often, but never stopped. Leila specialized in internal medicine, then public health and humanitarian medicine. She taught alongside clinical work, telling students what textbooks did not. In the 1990s and early 2000s, sanctions began affecting Iran's healthcare system, medicine shortages. Equipment unavailable. Leila faced new forms of helplessness, patients needing drugs that existed but could not reach them. She began writing reports, research. Documenting the impact of sanctions, Youssef helped from Paris. Together they wrote joint reports. Iranian and French doctors side by side. Chapter 8. The Second Crisis. Tehran 2012 to 2019. Sanctions. Intensified hospitals lacked critical medicines. Leila sat in meetings deciding who received treatment, the same triage as war, but caused by invisible systems. She continued writing. In 2015, hope came with the nuclear agreement. In 2018, it vanished. She continued working because patients still needed care. Chapter 9. The Young Doctors Tehran, 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic hit Leila. Now 52 did not step back. She stayed to support younger doctors one night. A young doctor, Sarah, broke down. Leila sat beside her, no reassurance, just presence, then said, "No one is ever prepared. What you call preparation is simply enough experience to continue anyway, Sarah." Returned to work, Leila realized that was the most important thing she did that night. Chapter 10. The End of the Year Letter. Paris, Tehran, Winter 2021. Youssef wrote a final letter. He had left fieldwork due to health. He wrote, "We may not know what happened to those patients, but we were there with them. That is real, and that cannot be taken away," Leila replied. "My mother said people will always need care no matter what happens outside." She was right. Conclusion: a language without translation. Leila still teaches in Tehran. Youssef joins remotely from Paris. They speak of a language beyond words, the language of a hand on a fevered forehead, of a stethoscope on a chest, of eyes, saying, "I see you, I am here, we will try." They did not end wars. They did not change politics, but in small rooms, they preserved something essential, that human beings can still see each other, that healing hands have no nationality. And sometimes, the simplest truth is the right one. There is a patient in front of you, and you are the doctor.